Action!
And then move on. Okay. And you're good to go.
And me?
Yeah.
All right. The death penalty is something that very rarely comes to mind in modern day conversations, but nonetheless is a barbaric system hidden behind the veil of justice. As I will prove from this speech that the death penalty is a useless system and is a negative on almost every level except to quench a family's need for vengeance against someone who would otherwise be paying for his crimes in a much more humane system. There are three basic tenets used by proponents of the death penalty. That the cost is less than that of life without parole, that the crime rate decreases because of such action, and that these people deserve their fate. As to the first proponent that many use to argue the death penalty, Charles M. Harris, J.D., Senior Judge of the 5th District Court of Appeal in Florida, has this to say about the cost of the death penalty. Death by execution is excessively expensive. Most people who support the death penalty believe it is more cost-effective than life in prison. Perhaps at one time, when executions were more swift and sure, this may have been the case. It is not now. Most people knowledgeable about the subject will agree that the delay now built into the system, more trial preparation, much longer time to get to trial, much longer jury selections and trials, much more complicated and far more frequent appeals, and continuous motions have increased the cost of capital punishment so that it is now many times the cost of keeping a prisoner in prison for life. As for the second point, that the decrease in crime is quite simply a fairy tale told by proponents of the death penalty to make themselves feel better, because this is quite simply not true. Because the homicide rate in Canada has moved in virtual lockstep with the rate within the rate in the United States, while approaches to the death penalty have diverged sharply. Both countries employed the death penalty in the 1950s, and the homicide trends were largely similar. However, in 1961, Canada severely restricted its application of the death penalty to those who committed premeditated murder and murder of a police officer only. In 1967, capital punishment was further restricted to apply only to the murder of on-duty police officers. Capital punishment was, the last execution in Canada was in 1962. Nonetheless, homicide rates in both the United States and Canada continued to move in lockstep. Even not taking into account our own states, where the states who still do have the death penalty have as much as a 28% difference in the rise in crime than those who do not have the death penalty. A final coffin is a criminal who may have started with a relatively minor offense, but will continue to escalate the crime because they believe they have now done something that, well, they're going to get the death penalty anyway, so why not have some fun? Such a case was with Jimmy Lee Smith and Gregory Powell in 1963. The people were pulled over because their license plate was not illuminated, and they assumed that they had been caught of their armed robberies, so they kidnapped both police officers. And they quote, "Son of a bitch, I didn't want to get into this business, but now that I'm in it, I have to go all the way." Smith and Powell mistakenly thought that the kidnapping they had just committed was a capital offense and decided to eliminate the witnesses in an onion field in Kern County. They shot one of the officers to death, but the other escaped and lived to identify the killers, who were convicted and sentenced to death. The final point for proponents of the death penalty is just sheerly killing someone to remove them from the face of the earth. First of all, something like this is just a barbaric act and does nothing to improve our image in the eyes of the civilized world, which is for the most part abolished the death penalty themselves. Finally, even some of the families themselves would rather see that the criminals who have killed their loved ones would quite simply just pay out their time in jail. One such case is Vera Ramirez Crutcher, someone whose son was killed 29 years ago. She has gone on to state, "I know how my family felt, the hurt, and I can imagine a mother and father going through the same thing we did. More killing via the death penalty is not the answer, Ramirez Crutcher said. It doesn't bring anybody back. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't give you closure. As you can see from the evidence I have provided for you today, the death penalty is in all actuality a harmful act that overall just ensures to taint America under the guise of righteousness. Much like a doctor who tells you an infection can only be cured with an amputation, the death penalty is much the same, with people believing the word of a doctor instead of going for the bottle of antibiotics right next to them. While I hold no doubt that the death penalty will unfortunately stay a mainstay in some states, I wish to ensure that all listeners know that at the end of the day, such actions are ultimately worsening America.
Turn that off! Turn that